There's a version of attraction that nobody talks about. Not because it's secret exactly, but because it doesn't photograph well. It doesn't fit into a highlight reel. You can't point at it across a room and say, "There, that's it." It lives in the in-between moments, the pauses, the small decisions a man makes when he thinks nobody is watching, or when he's convinced the moment isn't important enough to matter. But here's what most men don't understand about women. She is always watching the unimportant moments. That's precisely where she's learning the most about you. I've had conversations with women who struggled to explain why they fell for someone. They'd use words like, "I don't know, he just had something," or "I can't really describe it. He just felt different." And I used to think that was vague. I used to think they were avoiding the real answer. But the longer I paid attention, the more I realized they were describing something specific. They just didn't have language for it, because nobody had ever named it for them. What they were describing wasn't a single dramatic moment. It wasn't the grand gesture or the perfectly timed compliment. It was an accumulation, a series of quiet things a man did consistently, without performance, without agenda, without even realizing he was being evaluated. And those quiet things, most men have been conditioned to believe they don't matter. That attraction lives in confidence displays, in status, in how hard you pursue. So they pour their energy into the loud stuff, the obvious stuff, and they completely miss the layer underneath, the layer that actually moves her. This isn't going to be a list of tricks. It's not a script to run. What I'm about to walk you through are 10 things women find genuinely irresistible that most men have dismissed as irrelevant. And by the end, you won't just understand what they are, you'll understand why they work at a level that almost nothing else can replicate. Most men are terrified of silence, not in a way they'd admit to, but you can see it. The moment a lull appears in conversation, something in them panics. They reach for a joke, a story, a question, anything to fill the space and keep things moving. And on the surface, that looks like enthusiasm. It looks like someone who's engaged and present. But women feel something different underneath it. What she actually registers is anxiety, the need to perform, the inability to simply exist in a moment without managing it. Contrast that with a man who can sit in silence and not flinch, who lets a pause breathe, who finishes a thought, lets it land, and doesn't immediately rush to the next one. That kind of man feels rare, because he is rare. And the reason it's attractive isn't philosophical, it's practical. A man who's comfortable with silence is communicating something without a single word. He's saying he doesn't need your approval to feel okay. He's not filling space to manage your approval to feel okay. He's not filling space to manage your perception of him. He's simply present, and he trusts that's enough. Women notice this in conversation, but they also notice it in how he listens. There's a difference between a man who listens while preparing his response and a man who listens to actually understand. The first one you can feel. His eyes stay on you, but his mind is already somewhere else, already composing. The second one makes you feel like the room got quieter, like time slowed down slightly, like what you're saying is the only thing that matters in that moment. That feeling, that specific quality of being truly heard, is something most women have experienced so rarely that when they encounter it, they don't have words for it. They just know they want to be around him again. They know the conversation left them feeling full, rather than performed at. Silence isn't emptiness. In the hands of a grounded man, it's one of the most powerful things he can offer, and most men spend their entire lives running from it. There's a test that every woman runs, usually without consciously deciding to. She watches how a man treats the waiter, the person at the front desk, the stranger whose bag he almost walked into, the friend in the group who isn't particularly impressive or useful to him. She watches what he does when there's no reward for being decent, because anyone can be charming to someone they want something from. That's not character, that's strategy. And women, regardless of whether they can articulate it clearly, feel the difference between the two. A man who is warm and attentive to her, but dismissive to the server, tells her something specific about herself. She learns that his warmth is conditional, that she's receiving it now because she has his interest, but the moment that shifts, so does his behavior. He hasn't shown her who he is. He's shown her who he wants her to think he is. And some part of her files that away. Now think about the opposite. A man who treats a stranger with the same quiet respect he treats her with, who says thank you and means it, who doesn't perform patience when things go wrong, but actually has it, who doesn't talk down about people when they're not present. That man is showing her something real. He's showing her that his character isn't situational, and that how he shows up isn't dependent on what he's getting out of it. This matters because she's not just evaluating the present. She's projecting forward. She's asking herself subconsciously what it would feel like to be with this person over time. Not just on a good day, not just when things are exciting, but on an ordinary Tuesday. And a man who is kind without reason is a man she can trust across all of those Tuesdays. That consistency, that groundedness in who he is, regardless of the audience, is not something she can manufacture. Either it's there or it isn't. And when it is, she feels it before she can explain it. He said he'd call at 8 o'clock. He called at 8 o'clock. Not 8:15, not a text saying, hey, calling soon, not a verbal reminder, not a blowing tree or spring. 8 o'clock. And that might sound like a small thing. It is a small thing. That's exactly why it matters. Women pay attention to the gap between what a man says and what a man does. Not because they're running a scoreboard or looking for reasons to doubt him, but because that gap tells her everything she needs to know about how safe it is to trust him with something bigger. A man who is careless with small commitments is almost always careless with large ones. He's not doing it maliciously. He just hasn't learned that his word is a currency, and every time he spends it carelessly, it loses value. The man who says, I'll let you know, and then actually lets her know. The man who says, I won't mention that to anyone, and doesn't. The man who makes a plan and then shows up to it without needing 3 reminder texts. That man is building something she almost never experiences: reliability. Not the dramatic, rescue you in a crisis kind, the quiet daily kind that makes her nervous system settle, that makes her realize she doesn't have to brace herself around him. Most men underestimate how exhausting it is for a woman to constantly recalibrate expectations, to make plans and wonder if they'll hold, to share something vulnerable and then notice it resurfaced in a way she didn't consent to. That recalibration is work. It takes energy. And when a man removes the need for it, when she can simply take him at his word, she stops spending that energy on guard and starts spending it on connection. There's nothing romantic about consistency in the traditional sense. It doesn't make for a good story, but it creates something stories can't, which is a foundation. And foundations are what make women stay long after the initial spark has done its work. This one is physical, but it's not about looks, it's about pace. Watch how a man moves through a room when nobody's looking. Not when he's approaching someone or trying to make an impression, but in the in-between moments, walking to order a drink, reaching for something, standing and waiting. Some men move like they're running slightly late for something that happened 3 years ago. Quick, a little tense, eyes scanning, and there's an energy to that movement that reads, even from across the room, as unsettled. Then there are men who move like they've already arrived. Not slow in an affected look-at-me way, just unhurried, like their body is operating at the pace their mind actually lives at. Those men are physically calming to be around. Not passive, not low energy, just grounded in a way that makes the people near them exhale slightly without realizing it. Women pick this up the way you pick up temperature. You don't analyze it, you just feel it. A man who moves with ease makes her feel like the space they're sharing is safe. There's no tension she needs to match or manage, no anxious energy she has to absorb and process. He's just there, settled in himself, and that settledness extends outward. This also shows up in how he speaks. The men who rush their words, who talk faster when they're nervous, who fill the end of every sentence immediately with the beginning of the next one, that rhythm carries an undercurrent of unease. Whereas a man who speaks at a consistent, measured pace, who pauses mid-thought without apologizing for the pause, who doesn't rush to the punchline because he's not sure you'll stay for it, that rhythm communicates something entirely different. It says, I'm not afraid of the time this is taking. I trust that what I'm saying is worth the space it's occupying. And she registers that trust, and it becomes, quietly, one of the things she finds herself thinking about later. There is a specific kind of man women find deeply unattractive, and he often has no idea he's doing it. He's agreeable, eagerly, consistently agreeable. She says she prefers this kind of film. He prefers it too. She mentions a restaurant she hates. Suddenly, he's never been that fond of it either. He mirrors her preferences back to her like a reflection, and he thinks this is connection. he thinks finding common ground is the same as having something in common. But what she actually feels is the absence of him. You cannot connect with someone who isn't there, and a man without opinions isn't there, not really. He's a surface that shows you yourself, and that might feel comfortable briefly, but it's not interesting. It's not magnetic. You can't be genuinely curious about a person who becomes whatever is most convenient in the moment. Now contrast that with a man who disagrees, calmly, without heat, without needing her to change her mind, but genuinely. He sees it differently, and he says so. Not to win, not to be difficult, just because that's actually what he thinks. And he says it, and then he doesn't collapse when she pushes back. He listens, considers, and either updates his view because she made a real point, or he maintains it because he genuinely still sees it differently, and he's fine either way. That man is fascinating because she realizes she cannot predict him. She can't map his reactions in advance. He isn't performing stability, he has it. And unpredictability, when it comes from genuine inner solidity rather than chaos, is one of the most compelling things a woman can encounter. She wants to know what else he thinks. She wants to push on another idea and see how he holds. She wants to sit across from someone who is actually there. His opinions aren't a barrier, they're the proof that he exists. She mentioned months ago, almost parenthetically, that she'd been trying to finish a book she'd started twice. He asked about it later. Not in a formal way, not so did you finish that book, like he was running through a checklist. Just a casual mention that landed in the middle of a different conversation, and she realized he'd kept it. Not because he was tracking her, because he'd been listening. That moment is small, and it lands like something enormous. The details a man holds onto tell a woman what he values. Not what he says he values, but what actually registers. Because memory is attention made permanent. You don't remember things you weren't paying attention to. So, when he recalls something she said in passing, something she herself had half forgotten, she understands that he was present in that moment in a way that went beyond the surface. He wasn't managing the conversation, he was actually in it. Most men think retention is effort. That remembering details requires deliberate note-taking or mental rehearsal, but it doesn't work that way. When you're genuinely interested in a person, their details stay. You don't have to try, and women feel the difference between a man who's trying to remember and a man for whom she's memorable enough that the details stick naturally. There's also a vulnerability in being remembered, because it means she was seen. And being seen, truly seen, is something most women spend a significant portion of their lives not experiencing. They're perceived, they're desired, they're assessed. But seen requires someone who is paying attention to the actual person, rather than the version of her that serves his narrative. A man who notices what she loves, who recalls what frustrated her 3 weeks ago, who brings up something she'd shared without being prompted. He's not just retaining information. He's telling her without any words that she is worth paying attention to, and that lands somewhere words rarely reach. There's a quality that's almost impossible to manufacture and instantly recognizable when it's real. It's the sense that a man is the same person, whether you're watching or not. That there's no gap between who he is in a conversation with her and who he is when he's alone or with his friends or in a situation that offers him no social reward for being impressive. Women can feel performance. It registers as a very specific texture in an interaction. A slight extra polish on every story, a laugh that's a half second too enthusiastic, an agreement that comes just a beat too quickly. A way of angling every self-reference so it lands favorably. These aren't lies exactly, but they're not the whole truth either. And she knows it. She might not articulate it immediately. She might even find him charming. But something underneath doesn't fully relax. Now think about a man who doesn't perform. Who tells a story where he came out looking confused, or wrong, or just human, without needing to add a layer that redeems him at the end. Who doesn't steer every anecdote toward a favorable conclusion. Who can sit with her and occasionally say nothing remarkable because he's not trying to be remarkable in every moment. He's just present. That kind of man is disarming because she doesn't need her defenses up around him. She doesn't need to question whether what she's receiving is real. He's not selling her a version of himself. He's just being himself and trusting that's sufficient. That trust, that ease, is one of the most attractive things she can encounter because it gives her permission to do the same. When neither person is performing, something genuine can happen, and genuine is rare enough that when she finds it, she holds on to it. Not because she made a decision to, because her whole system simply relaxes. And relaxation, real relaxation in someone's company, is one of the quieter forms of desire. The reservation got lost. The plan fell apart. Someone said something dismissive to him in front of her, and it landed visibly. These are not dramatic moments, but they are revealing ones. And she is watching, not to judge, but because this is where the real shape of a man becomes visible. A lot of men have learned to present well under normal conditions. The conversation flows, nothing unexpected happens, and they come across as relaxed and grounded. But introduce friction, small, ordinary friction, and what was underneath the surface shows up quickly. There's the man who tightens, who gets short, who redirects his frustration sideways, at the waiter, at the situation, at the tone of the evening. He recovers quickly and would tell you he barely reacted, but she felt it. She felt the shift in temperature, and she filed it. Then there's the man who absorbs it. Not passively, not with forced cheerfulness that feels like suppression, but with a genuine, unhurried, "All right, let's figure it out." Who encounters the inconvenience and doesn't seem to need the situation to be different in order to stay intact himself. His mood isn't dependent on external conditions cooperating. His sense of self doesn't hinge on every moment going smoothly. That second man is not just easier to be around, he feels fundamentally safe to be around because she's watching. She's always watching, whether she'd collapse that safety in a difficult moment, whether his stability is contingent on comfort. And a man who demonstrates that his groundedness survives ordinary difficulty is a man who earns a specific kind of trust that goes beyond attraction. It's the trust of knowing that when things are actually hard, not restaurant reservation hard, but life hard, he won't crumble or lash out or need her to manage him through it. That quiet demonstration of composure is not dramatic, but it is to most women one of the most attractive things they'll ever witness in a man. The last thing I want to leave you with is the one that most men are most resistant to, because it sounds like the opposite of effort. But it is in its own way the highest form of it. He knows when to stop talking. He knows when the moment has already peaked, and adding more words would only dilute it. He knows when the conversation has said what it needed to say, when the evening has reached its natural fullness, when pressing further would turn something clean into something crowded. Most men, when they feel a connection building, do more. They talk more. They reach further. They try to extend the moment because they're afraid of losing it, and in doing so, they lose it. They tip the scale from leaving her wanting more to leaving her with enough that she's satisfied. And satisfied is not the feeling you want to end on. You want her to drive home with the windows down, feeling like something was just beginning. A man who knows when to stop demonstrates something women find difficult to articulate, but impossible to ignore. He's not desperate for the moment to be more than it is. He trusts that what happened was enough. He trusts that she got something worth coming back to. And that trust, that refusal to oversell or overstay, is the thing that sends her home replaying the conversation. This applies to everything. Knowing when the text has been responded to fully and doesn't need a follow-up. Knowing when the compliment was received and doesn't need to be elaborated on. Knowing when to end a date while the energy is still high rather than running it into the ground out of anxiety. What women find irresistible at the end of all of this is a man who is full in himself. Not reaching outward to be completed by her reaction or her approval or her continued presence. A man like that doesn't need to perform any of what we've talked about. He simply lives it. And she feels it before she ever understands it.